This weekend has been designated in this country by the U.S. bishops as Respect Life Weekend. And on this weekend, the church calls upon us to renew our commitment to respect life from womb to tomb, as it were. The late Cardinal Bernardin of Chicago spoke of a consistent, comprehensive ethic of life. It's a wonderful way to think of it, an ethic of life which is woven together like a seamless garment. Remember the seamless garment at the foot of the cross? So this consistent ethic of life across all life that is woven together like a seamless garment. And recently, in his what's known as an apostolic exhortation by Pope Francis called Rejoice and Be Glad, Pope Francis helped us to put some dimension on this whole question of respecting life. Here's what Pope Francis wrote. Our defense of the innocent unborn, for example, needs to be clear, firm, and passionate. For at stake is the dignity of a human life, which is always sacred and demands love for each person, regardless of his or her stage of development. Then the Pope went on to say, equally sacred, however, are the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned, and the underprivileged, the vulnerable, infirm, and elderly exposed to covert euthanasia, the victims of human trafficking, new forms of slavery, and every form of rejection. So it sounds like the late Cardinal Bernardin and Pope Francis are on the same page, a seamless garment woven into a consistent ethic of all life. Preserving the dignity of human life and human existence. The words that we heard from Mark's Jesus today concerning marriage and divorce are pretty direct, aren't they? They're hard and they're challenging, but they also speak to the whole notion of preserving human life and human dignity. And since we hear these words that were written some 2,000 years ago through the filter of our own 21st century eyes and ears and experiences, we call that our cultural bias. It's just the way we're conditioned to hear things in our lifetime. Sometimes we need to go back and consider the religious and the cultural atmosphere that was taking place, the practices that were taking place during Jesus' time. Now, in the ancient Mediterranean world, where the kinship system was the basic value, and that was based on honor and shame. There was great value in honor, and just it was awful to be shamed. And so those two elements bound the whole culture together. They were the basis of the way that they lived. And so when it came to the question of marriage, marriages were between families, not necessarily between individuals. Individuals were married, but they were arranged marriages, as we might know them. Not necessarily based on love, but it was rather a legal arrangement, a contract, as it were. It was a matter of honor for the family, and that was the foundational value. And divorce not only separated the two partners, but it also separated two families. And what happens when that takes place? Well, in that atmosphere, that culture, the woman's family is now shamed. They were shamed. And the woman was ostracized. She was put off. And in order to remedy this shame, guess what happened? Families started feuding and fighting, and bloodshed frequently occurred. Now, interestingly enough, What did the rabbis in Jesus' time have to say about this? Well, there was one rabbi, he was a more conservative fella. He said, his name was Rabbi Shammai, held that divorce was only permissible in the case of sexual impropriety. On the other hand, Rabbi Hillel argued that the husband could issue a bill of divorce for virtually any reason. Maybe his wife was a bad cook. That was the basis for a divorce. Or maybe she talked wrongly about him to his family, brought shame. That was a basis for divorce. And it was Hillel's view, this latter rabbi, that was popular in Jesus' time. And that's why divorce was so common. And the Pharisees are trying to trick Jesus. Remember what happened to John the Baptist when he challenged King Herod over marrying the king's sister? He lost his head, literally. Had to be in Jesus' mind. And so it's within this context that we need to hear this Pharisaic, tricky legal question. Is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife? And rather than discuss the legal question, what's Jesus always do? He flips it. He points back to Genesis. He points to the larger question and reminds them of God's plan for marriage. And he reframes that question, is it lawful, by elevating the entire notion of marriage and placing the married couple on par with one another. Now that was very revolutionary. To say that a man and a woman were equal. Jesus cites the words of Genesis, and the two shall become one flesh. God created all of us, men and women, in God's own image. The fullness and the diversity of humanity is reflected in both. And because of that, Christian marriage calls for a man and a woman to be equal partners as Christ's disciples to one another and to the world. How often do we think of our marriages as part of our baptismal call, our call to discipleship, to honor one another as individuals equally created by God? Now, frankly, in our world, we have all, in some fashion, touched the tragedy of divorce or separation or alienation. And it's at those times that the mercy of God comes into play as a refuge for all those who suffer that kind of separation. That's Jesus' most basic teaching, isn't it? Mercy and forgiveness woven as a consistent ethic of life all throughout the Scriptures. And if we're to take Jesus' words seriously, then our challenge as church is to be merciful to married couples who are experiencing difficulties, as well as those who are divorced and separated. Marriage is harder these days, especially in this environment of COVID. But today, as disciples, we bring all of those problems and issues right here, and we place them on the table of the Lord. And God promises us that we will experience the risen Christ, that we will be infused with the breath of the Holy Spirit. And so, having experienced that, we can then go out and we can be God's peace to one another.